Imagine you're sitting in a busy Chicago square, sketching the world around you, lost in your thoughts. The sun is setting, the crowd is buzzing, and life feels perfect for a moment. Then, out of nowhere, a police officer approaches, his eyes locked on you, not because of what you've done, but because of who you are. One glance, one assumption, and your entire world turns upside down. This is the story of James Carter, a man whose life changed in an instant, and the officer who made a choice that would echo across a city. Stay with us. This is a story you won't forget. James Carter sat on a wrought iron bench in Lincoln Square, the late afternoon sun bathing the bustling Chicago neighborhood in a golden hue. His pencil moved swiftly across the pages of a worn sketchbook, capturing the vibrant scene before him. A street musician strumming a guitar, a group of teenagers laughing over iced coffee, and the soft sway of maple trees lining the square. For James, a 38-year-old FBI special agent, these moments of quiet creativity were rare. His job demanded constant vigilance, but here, in this lively corner of the city, he could let his guard down, even if just for an hour. Lincoln Square was his refuge, a place where he could blend into the crowd and simply be himself. A black man with a talent for art, not a federal agent carrying the weight of his badge. Across the square, Officer Daniel Walsh patrolled the area, his boots clicking against the cobblestone path. At 45, Walsh had spent nearly half his life as a Chicago PD officer, his instincts honed by years of navigating the city's complexities. He prided himself on his ability to spot trouble before it started, a skill he believed had kept him alive through countless shifts. But today, his instincts were clouded by something else. A recent string of petty thefts in the area had put the precinct on edge, and Walsh was determined to prove he still had what it took to keep the streets safe. As Walsh scanned the crowd, his eyes landed on James, seated alone on the bench, his focus entirely on his sketchbook. Something about James caught Walsh's attention, the way he sat, too composed, too detached from the chaos around him. A black man in a neatly pressed jacket, sketching in a public square. Walsh's gut twisted, a familiar suspicion creeping in. "Doesn't look like he belongs here," he muttered to himself, adjusting his grip on his radio. There had been a vague report about a suspect in the thefts, male, medium build, possibly in his 30s or 40s. It wasn't much to go on, but for Walsh, it was enough. James sensed the shift in the air before he saw it. The weight of a stare, heavy and unyielding, pulled him from his sketch. He glanced up, his eyes meeting Walsh's across the square. The officer's expression was unmistakable, a mix of scrutiny and prejudice, a look James had encountered too many times before. He sighed inwardly, closing his sketchbook with deliberate care. He wasn't surprised, but that didn't make it any less exhausting. At 38, James had learned to navigate these moments with precision, knowing that one wrong move could escalate a situation beyond his control. Walsh's hand rested on his holster as he approached, his posture rigid, his eyes never leaving James. The square seemed to quiet around them, the hum of conversation fading as passers-by sensed the tension. A young woman nearby, sipping coffee at a cafe table, discreetly pulled out her phone and began recording, her instincts telling her this was about to become something worth documenting. "Afternoon," Walsh said, stopping a few feet from James, his voice clipped but carrying an edge of authority. "What are you doing here?" James kept his hands visible, resting them on his closed sketchbook. "Afternoon, officer," he replied, his tone calm and measured. "Just sketching. Nice day for it." Walsh's eyes flicked to the sketchbook, then back to James's face, searching for something to latch onto. "Sketching, huh? You do that a lot around here?" "When I get the chance," James said, meeting Walsh's gaze without flinching. He could feel the officer's suspicion, thick and palpable. but he wasn't about to give him the reaction he was fishing for. "Mind if I see some ID?" Walsh asked, his tone sharpening. James's jaw tightened slightly, but his expression remained neutral. He knew this dance all too well. The demand for ID, the probing questions, the assumption of guilt before innocence. "May I ask what this is about, officer?" he said, his voice steady. Walsh bristled at the question, his hand inching closer to his holster. "I'm asking the questions here," he snapped. "You fit the description of someone we're looking for. Now, let's see that ID." James took a slow breath, weighing his options. He knew his rights. Sitting in a public square sketching wasn't a crime, and he wasn't obligated to show ID without probable cause. But he also knew that refusing could escalate things quickly, especially with an officer like Walsh, whose eyes burned with a mix of authority and prejudice. "Am I under arrest?" James asked, his tone still calm but firm. Walsh's face hardened. "You will be if you don't cooperate," he shot back, stepping closer, his voice rising just enough to draw more eyes from the crowd. The woman with the phone adjusted her angle, capturing every word. James held Walsh's gaze, refusing to back down. "I'm just sitting here, sketching," he said. "What's the description you're talking about?" "Don't get smart with me," Walsh growled, his patience fraying. "Show me your ID, now." The tension between them was electric, a silent battle of wills. James knew he could push back, could demand to speak to a supervisor, but he also knew the risks. With a crowd now watching and at least one phone recording, he decided to comply. For now. "All right," he said quietly, reaching slowly for his wallet. "I'm moving slow, okay?" Walsh watched every movement like a hawk, his body tense, ready to react. James pulled out his driver's license and handed it over, his eyes never leaving Walsh's. The officer snatched the ID, glancing at it briefly. The name, James Carter, meant nothing to him, but that didn't matter. In his mind, he was already convinced he'd caught someone worth detaining. "Stand up," Walsh ordered, stepping back slightly. James sighed, a flicker of frustration crossing his face, but he complied, rising smoothly from the bench. He kept his hands visible, aware of the growing crowd and the phone still recording. "What's next, officer?" he asked, his voice steady. "Turn around," Walsh said, pulling out a pair of handcuffs. The metallic click echoed in the quiet square, drawing gasps from a few onlookers. James felt a surge of anger, but pushed it down. He turned around, letting Walsh cuff his wrists, the cold metal biting into his skin. He could hear the murmurs from the crowd, the soft buzz of conversation, as people began to question what was happening. The woman with the phone moved closer, her video now capturing the full scene. As Walsh tightened the cuffs, a nagging doubt crept into his mind. James's calmness, his refusal to panic. It wasn't what Walsh expected from a guilty man, but his pride wouldn't let him back down now. He'd committed to this, and he wasn't about to lose face in front of a crowd. Grabbing James's arm, he began leading him toward the patrol car parked at the edge of the square. James walked silently, his mind racing, but his exterior calm. He wasn't worried about the arrest itself. He knew who he was, knew this would unravel once his identity came to light. But the weight of the moment pressed down on him, a reminder of how little had changed. Despite his years at the FBI, his accolades, his sacrifices, he was still just another black man in the eyes of someone like Walsh. The exhaustion of that truth was heavier than the cuffs on his wrists. As they reached the patrol car, Walsh opened the back door and guided James inside. The crowd watched, some whispering, others shaking their heads. The woman with the phone stopped recording, her hands trembling as she uploaded the video to social media with a caption. "This just happened in Lincoln Square. Why was this man arrested?" Within minutes, the video would begin to spread, setting the stage for a reckoning neither James nor Walsh could have predicted. James settled into the back seat, the door slamming shut behind him. He looked out the window, watching the vibrant square fade into the distance as Walsh started the car. The world outside blurred, but James's focus was razor sharp. This wasn't just about him anymore. It was about the system, the biases, and the change that needed to come. As the car pulled away, he made a silent vow. This day would not end in silence. The patrol car's engine growled as Officer Daniel Walsh drove James Carter toward the 19th District Precinct in Chicago. The city's skyline loomed in the distance, its towering buildings a stark contrast to the tension inside the vehicle. Walsh's hands gripped the steering wheel tightly, his jaw clenched as he replayed the encounter in Lincoln Square. James's calm demeanor had thrown him off, made him question his instincts, but he wasn't about to admit that. Not to himself, and certainly not to the man in the back seat. James sat silently, his cuffed hands resting uncomfortably behind him. The city streets flashed by, a blur of neon signs and evening commuters, but his mind was elsewhere. He was calculating, assessing the situation with the precision of an FBI agent who'd faced worse. He knew Walsh was acting on bias, not evidence, and he knew that once they reached the precinct, the truth would come out. But the weight of being here, cuffed like a criminal for no reason other than his skin color, stirred a familiar anger, one he'd learned to temper, but never fully erase. Walsh glanced at James in the rearview mirror, his eyes narrowing. "You're pretty quiet back there," he said, his voice laced with suspicion. "Got something to hide?" James met Walsh's gaze in the mirror, his expression unreadable. "Just wondering what I did to end up here," he replied, his tone even. "Care to enlighten me?" Walsh snorted, shaking his head. "Don't play innocent with me. You know why you're here." "Do I?" James said, raising an eyebrow. "Because last I checked, sketching in a public square isn't a crime." Walsh's grip on the wheel tightened. "You matched the description of a suspect we're looking for. That's all you need to know." James let the silence stretch, his eyes still locked on Walsh's in the mirror. "And what's that description again? Tall, black, male? That's half the city, officer." Walsh's face flushed, a mix of anger and discomfort. He knew James was challenging him, poking holes in his reasoning, but he wasn't about to back down. "Keep talking like that, and you'll make this worse for yourself," he snapped. James didn't flinch. Worse than being cuffed for no reason. Hard to imagine. The car fell silent again, the tension thick enough to choke on. Walsh focused on the road, his mind racing. He'd made arrests like this before, quick decisions based on gut instinct. But something about this one felt different. James wasn't reacting the way suspects usually did. There was no fear, no desperation, just a quiet confidence that made Walsh's stomach twist. As they pulled into the precinct's parking lot, Walsh's radio crackled with a message from dispatch. "Officer Walsh, Captain Mitchell wants you in her office when you get in," the voice said. Walsh frowned, his unease growing. Captain Sarah Mitchell was a no-nonsense leader, respected, but feared for her strict adherence to protocol. He hadn't expected her to get involved so soon. "Copy that," he muttered, parking the car. He got out and opened the back door, pulling James out with a little more force than necessary. James didn't resist, but he gave Walsh a look that said he'd noticed. As they walked into the precinct, the buzz of activity hit them. Officers typing reports, phones ringing, the hum of a busy evening shift. Walsh led James through the main hall, ignoring the curious glances from colleagues. He could feel their eyes on him, questioning what he'd brought in this time. At the booking desk, Officer Emily Chen looked up, her brow furrowing as she saw James in cuffs. "What's this about, Walsh?" she asked, her tone neutral but tinged with skepticism. "Caught him acting suspicious in Lincoln Square," Walsh said, handing over James's ID. "Matches the description for the thefts." Chen glanced at the ID. then at James, her eyes lingering for a moment. There was a flicker of doubt in her expression, but she nodded and started entering the information. James caught the look, filing it away. Someone here was starting to question Walsh's story, and that was a good sign. "Captain Mitchell's waiting," Chen said, handing the ID back to Walsh. "She wants you to bring him straight to her." Walsh's jaw tightened. He hadn't planned on facing Mitchell so soon, but he had no choice. "Fine," he said, grabbing James's arm. "Let's go." James walked beside Walsh, his steps measured, his expression calm. He could sense Walsh's growing anxiety, the way his grip tightened with every step. It was another crack in the officer's armor, and James knew it would only widen once they reached Mitchell's office. They stopped at a glass-paneled door, marked Captain Sarah Mitchell. Walsh knocked, his hand unsteady, and a firm voice called from inside. "Come in." Walsh opened the door, guiding James into a spacious office lined with commendations and case files. Captain Mitchell, a woman in her late 40s, with sharp gray eyes and a commanding presence, looked up from her desk. Her expression was unreadable, but there was a weight to her gaze that made Walsh shift uncomfortably. "Officer Walsh," Mitchell said, her voice steady. "Explain yourself." Walsh cleared his throat, pushing James forward slightly. "Caught this guy in Lincoln Square, Captain. He was acting suspicious, matched the description for the thefts. Refused to cooperate when I asked for." Dr. Mitchell's eyes shifted to James, and for a brief moment, something passed between them. A flicker of recognition, quickly masked. James saw it, and he knew Mitchell was playing this carefully, letting Walsh dig his own hole. "Is that so?" Mitchell said, leaning back in her chair. "And what exactly was suspicious about him?" Walsh hesitated, feeling the pressure of Mitchell's scrutiny. "He was alone, sketching. Didn't seem like he belonged there," he said, the words sounding flimsier than he'd intended. Mitchell raised an eyebrow. "Sketching? That's your probable cause?" Walsh's face reddened. He was evasive, Captain. Wouldn't show ID right away, acted like he had something to hide. James stood silently, his hands still cuffed, his eyes moving between Walsh and Mitchell. He could see the dynamic shifting, the way Mitchell's questions were unraveling Walsh's story. For now, he chose to stay quiet, letting the officer's own words betray him. Captain Sarah Mitchell leaned forward in her chair, her sharp gray eyes fixed on Officer Daniel Walsh. The air in her office was thick with tension, the weight of the moment pressing down on everyone. James Carter stood calmly, his hands still cuffed behind him, his expression unreadable, but radiating a quiet authority. Walsh's explanation for the arrest, James's suspicious sketching and evasive behavior, had crumbled under Mitchell's probing questions, and now the officer was visibly rattled, his confidence eroding with every passing second. "Officer Walsh," Mitchell said, her voice calm but cutting. "You've told me what you thought Mr. Carter was doing. Now I'd like to hear from him. Mr. Carter, what's your side of the story?" James took a slow breath, his eyes flicking briefly to Walsh before settling on Mitchell. "I was in Lincoln Square, sketching the street scene, when Officer Walsh approached me," he began, his voice steady and deliberate. "He demanded my ID without explaining why, accused me of being a suspect in some vague crime, and when I asked for clarification, he escalated the situation. I complied, gave him my ID, and still ended up in cuffs. I'd like to know what justified that." Walsh shifted uncomfortably, his face flushing. "You were acting like you had something to hide," he interjected, his voice defensive. "You didn't just hand over the ID, you questioned me." Mitchell held up a hand, silencing Walsh. "Let him finish," she said firmly, her gaze never leaving James. James continued, his tone unwavering. "I questioned you because I have the right to know why I'm being targeted. I wasn't breaking any laws, officer. I was sitting on a bench, sketching. If that's suspicious, then half the people in Lincoln Square should be in cuffs right now." A faint smile tugged at Mitchell's lips, though she quickly masked it. She turned to Walsh, her expression hardening. "Officer, do you have any evidence, beyond your gut feeling, that Mr. Carter was involved in any criminal activity?" Walsh opened his mouth, then closed it, his mind racing for an answer. "He matched the description, Captain," he said weakly. "I was following protocol." Mitchell's eyes narrowed. "A description so vague, it could apply to thousands of people in this city? That's not protocol, Walsh. That's a fishing expedition." The room fell silent, the weight of Mitchell's words hanging in the air. Walsh's shoulders slumped, the reality of his mistake beginning to sink in. James, sensing the shift, decided it was time to change the dynamic. "Captain Mitchell," he said, his voice calm but firm, "there's something you should know. I'm not just a random guy sketching in the park. I'm Special Agent James Carter, FBI, Chicago Field Office." The words landed like a thunderclap. Walsh's head snapped up, his eyes wide with shock. Mitchell's expression didn't change, but a flicker of confirmation passed through her eyes. She'd suspected as much, having recognized James from a joint task force briefing months ago. She played it cool, nodding slightly. "Is that so, Agent Carter?" "Yes, ma'am," James replied, his gaze steady. "I was off duty, trying to enjoy a rare moment of peace. Apparently, that's enough to get me arrested in this city." Walsh's face drained of color. "FBI?" he stammered, his voice barely above a whisper. The implications hit him like a freight train. He'd just arrested a federal agent, a highly respected one, based on nothing but his own biased assumptions. His career, his reputation, everything he'd built over 2 decades, flashed before his eyes. Mitchell turned to Walsh, her voice icy. "Uncuff him! Now!" Walsh fumbled with the keys, his hands trembling as he unlocked the cuffs. James rubbed his wrists, giving Walsh a measured look that carried more weight than words could. "Thank you," he said, his tone polite but laced with an unspoken challenge. Mitchell stood, her presence commanding the room. "Officer Walsh, step outside. I need to speak with Agent Carter alone." Walsh hesitated, his pride warring with his fear, but Mitchell's glare left no room for argument. "Yes, Captain," he muttered, shuffling out of the office, the door closing behind him with a heavy thud. Once they were alone, Mitchell's demeanor softened slightly. "Agent Carter, I apologize for this. I had a feeling I recognized you, but I needed to let this play out to get the full picture." James nodded, his expression serious. "I appreciate that, Captain, but let's be clear. This isn't about me being an FBI agent. It's about the fact that I was targeted for no reason other than the color of my skin. That's the problem we need to address." Mitchell sighed, running a hand through her short cropped hair. "You're right, and I promise you, we will address it. But why didn't you tell Walsh who you were from the start?" James's eyes darkened, a flicker of pain crossing his face. "Because it shouldn't matter, Captain. I shouldn't have to flash a badge to be treated like a human being. No one should." Mitchell nodded, her respect for James growing. "Fair enough. I'm going to handle Walsh, but I'd like your input on how we move forward. This can't happen again." "Agreed," James said. "But it's not just about Walsh. It's about the system that lets this kind of thing slide. I'm willing to work with you, but it's going to take real change. Training, oversight, accountability." Mitchell extended her hand. "You have my word, Agent Carter. Let's make it happen." James shook her hand, a silent agreement forming between them. But as he left the office, his mind was already turning to the bigger picture. This wasn't just about one officer or one precinct. It was about a city, a country, and a history that needed reckoning. Meanwhile, outside the precinct, the video recorded by the woman in Lincoln Square was spreading like wildfire. Posted online with a simple plea, "Share this injustice." It had already garnered thousands of views, shares, and comments. "This is why we can't trust the police," one viewer wrote. "Arrested for sketching. This is 2025, not 1950, another added, their words fueling a growing outcry for justice that echoed from Chicago to every corner of the nation. Local news outlets were picking up the story, and by the time James stepped out of Mitchell's office, his phone was buzzing with messages from colleagues and friends who'd seen the viral clip. One message stood out, a text from Agent Lisa Harper, his partner at the FBI. "Just saw the video. You okay? This is blowing up." James typed a quick reply, "I'm fine, but this is just the start." He knew the video would bring attention, but he also knew it could complicate things. The public's outrage was a double-edged sword. It could push for change, but it could also deepen the divide between the community and the police. Back inside, Walsh sat at his desk, his head in his hands. The weight of his mistake was crushing, but his pride still clung to him like a lifeline. He'd been a cop for 20 years. How could he have gotten this so wrong? The memory of a past incident flashed through his mind. A similar arrest years ago, where he'd been praised for his quick thinking, despite shaky evidence. That praise had fueled his confidence, his belief that his instincts were infallible. Now, that belief was crumbling, and Walsh wasn't sure who he was without it. The 19th District Precinct was a hive of tension the next morning. The viral video from Lincoln Square had now surpassed 10 million views, igniting a nationwide movement for justice. From coast to coast, people shared the footage, their voices uniting in a powerful demand to end profiling and hold those in power accountable. Protesters had begun gathering outside the precinct, holding signs that read, "End racial profiling," and "Justice for James Carter." The story was now a local headline, with national outlets like CNN and the New York Times picking it up. For Captain Sarah Mitchell, the pressure was immense. She needed to act swiftly to restore trust, but she also needed to ensure the investigation into Officer Daniel Walsh was thorough and fair. Inside the precinct, Walsh stood in a small conference room, facing a panel of internal affairs officers, Captain Mitchell, and a union representative. His uniform felt stifling, the badge on his chest heavier than ever. Across the table sat James Carter, his presence a quiet but undeniable force. Next to him was Agent Lisa Harper, a sharp-witted FBI colleague who'd insisted on attending to support James. The room also included Maya Thompson, a local community organizer whose advocacy for police reform had made her a prominent voice in Chicago. Her presence added another layer of scrutiny, ensuring the investigation wouldn't stay behind closed doors. Mitchell opened the meeting, her voice steady but firm. "This review is to determine the appropriateness of Officer Walsh's actions during the arrest of Special Agent James Carter. We'll examine the evidence, hear from witnesses, and decide on disciplinary measures. Let's begin with the incident report." An internal affairs officer, Lieutenant Torres, took the lead. "Officer Walsh, you stated that Agent Carter matched the description of a theft suspect. Can you clarify what specific behaviors led you to approach him?" Walsh cleared his throat, his voice strained. He was alone, sketching. Didn't seem to fit the vibe of the square. When I asked for his ID, he was evasive, questioning me instead of complying. James leaned forward, his eyes locked on Walsh. "I was sketching a street musician, officer. I asked why you needed my ID because I have the right to know. You didn't answer. You just escalated." Walsh's face tightened, but he didn't respond. Torres turned to James. "Agent Carter, can you describe the encounter in more detail?" James recounted the incident with precision, his voice calm, but laced with restrained frustration. "Officer Walsh approached me with his hand on his holster, like I was already a threat. He didn't ask questions. He made demands. When I tried to explain, he cut me off, cuffed me, and treated me like a criminal in front of a crowd. I told him I was FBI, but he didn't listen." Lisa Harper interjected, her tone sharp. This wasn't just a mistake. It was a clear case of racial profiling. James has a spotless record, multiple commendations, and was off duty, doing nothing wrong. This is exactly the kind of systemic issue we've been fighting against. Maya Thompson nodded, her expression serious. The community is outraged, Captain. That video shows what we've been saying for years. Black men can't even exist in public without being targeted. This isn't just about Walsh. It's about a culture that lets this happen. Mitchell listened intently, her face unreadable. She turned to Walsh. Officer, did you consider that your assumptions might have been influenced by Agent Carter's race? Walsh hesitated, his mind flashing back to the moment he'd seen James in the square. Deep down, he knew the truth, but admitting it felt like betraying everything he'd built. I was just doing my job, he said, his voice hollow. I didn't mean to profile him. You didn't mean to, but you did, James said, his voice steady but piercing. And that's the problem. Your job shouldn't involve treating innocent people like suspects based on how they look. The room fell silent, the weight of James's words sinking in. Torres shifted to the evidence, presenting witness statements from Lincoln Square. We have accounts from 6 bystanders, all consistent. Agent Carter was cooperative, and Officer Walsh was aggressive from the start. The body cam footage confirms this. Mitchell nodded, her expression grim. I've reviewed the footage. It shows Officer Walsh escalating the situation without cause. The video from the bystander, now public, corroborates this. Walsh's stomach churned. He hadn't known about the body cam footage until now, and the mention of the viral video made his blood run cold. I didn't know anyone was recording, he mumbled, almost to himself. That's not the point, Maya said, her voice firm. The point is, you acted on bias, and now the whole world is watching. This is a chance to show that Chicago PD takes accountability seriously. Mitchell turned to Walsh, her tone authoritative. Officer, you're on administrative leave pending the outcome of this investigation. I suggest you use this time to reflect on your actions and what they mean for this department. Walsh nodded numbly, his world unraveling. As the meeting adjourned, he caught James's eye for a moment. There was no anger in James's gaze, just a quiet resolve that made Walsh feel smaller than ever. He left the room in a daze, the echoes of his own justifications ringing hollow. Outside, the protests had grown, with hundreds now gathered, chanting for justice. Maya Thompson joined them, speaking through a megaphone. This isn't just about one man. It's about every black person who's been profiled, harassed, or worse. We demand change. The crowd roared, their voices carrying into the precinct, a reminder that this was bigger than any one person. James and Lisa stayed behind, speaking quietly with Mitchell. This is going to get messy, Lisa said, glancing at her phone, where notifications about the viral video were piling up. The Bureau's already getting calls. They're behind you, James, but they want this handled carefully. I don't want careful, James replied, his voice low but fierce. I want real. This is our chance to push for reform, not just for me, but for everyone who's been through this. Mitchell nodded, her respect for James deepening. I'm with you, Agent Carter. But we need to navigate this storm first. The community's watching, and so is the nation. A week later, the 19th District Precinct was a fortress under siege, not by violence, but by the unrelenting scrutiny of a city demanding answers. The viral video from Lincoln Square had now surpassed 10 million views, igniting a nationwide movement for justice. From coast to coast, people shared the footage, their voices uniting in a powerful demand to end profiling and hold those in power accountable. News vans lined the streets, and the protests outside had evolved into a daily vigil, with community leaders, students, and families joining hands in a call for systemic change. Inside, Captain Sarah Mitchell was working around the clock, balancing the investigation into Officer Daniel Walsh with the broader task of rebuilding trust. James Carter sat in a small meeting room, flanked by Agent Lisa Harper and Maya Thompson. Across from them was Mitchell, who just received the final report from Internal Affairs. The evidence was damning. Witness statements, body cam footage, and the viral video all painted a clear picture of Walsh's racial profiling. But for James, this wasn't just about one officer. It was about the system that had enabled him. Mitchell cleared her throat, her expression somber. Agent Carter, Ms. Thompson, Agent Harper, after a thorough review, we've decided to recommend Officer Walsh's termination. His actions violated department policy and undermined public trust. I'm presenting this to the police board tomorrow. James nodded, his face serious. That's a start, Captain. But it's not enough. Firing one officer doesn't fix the problem. We need training that actually works, oversight that holds people accountable, and a culture that doesn't let bias fester. Maya leaned forward, her voice passionate. The community agrees. We're organizing a town hall to discuss reforms, and we want the precinct's commitment. People are tired of empty promises. Mitchell met Maya's gaze, her resolve unwavering. You have my commitment. We're revising our training to focus on de-escalation and implicit bias. I'm also pushing for a civilian oversight board to review cases like this, but I need your help to make sure these changes stick. Lisa Harper nodded, her tone pragmatic. The FBI can offer support, training modules, data on best practices. But James is right. This has to go beyond policy. It's about changing hearts and minds. James's thoughts drifted to a memory from his early days at the FBI. He'd been part of a task force investigating a string of hate crimes in rural Illinois, working tirelessly to protect communities targeted for their race. One night, after a long shift, he'd been pulled over by a local cop who assumed he was a suspect, not an agent. The humiliation, the fear, it had stayed with him, fueling his drive to fight for change. Now, in this precinct, he saw a chance to turn that pain into progress. I'm in, James said, his voice firm. But we need to involve the community, not just the precinct. People need to feel heard, not just pacified. Mitchell extended her hand. Deal. Let's make this a model for other cities. As they shook hands, James felt a flicker of hope, but he knew the road ahead would be long. The protests outside were a reminder that change wasn't just a policy, it was a movement. Meanwhile, Daniel Walsh sat alone in his apartment, the TV muted, but showing footage of the protests. His badge and uniform lay on the table, relics of a life he no longer recognized. The call from Mitchell had come that morning. He was officially suspended, with termination pending. His union rep had promised to fight it, but Walsh knew the evidence was overwhelming. The viral video had sealed his fate, playing on every news channel, dissected by pundits and activists alike. He thought back to his first year as a cop, a time when he'd believed he was making a difference. A commendation for stopping a robbery had cemented his reputation as a hero. But now he wondered if that moment had been tainted by the same biases he'd shown with James. The memory gnawed at him, a reminder that his instincts had betrayed him more than once. A knock at the door startled him. It was his former partner, Officer Tom Reynolds, who'd been one of the few to check on him. You okay, Dan? Reynolds asked, stepping inside. Walsh shook his head, his voice hoarse. I messed up, Tom. I didn't see it then, but I see it now. I don't know how to fix this. Reynolds sighed, sitting across from him. You start by owning it. You made a mistake, a big one, but you can still choose what kind of man you want to be. Walsh nodded, but the words felt distant. He wasn't sure who that man was anymore. Outside the precinct, the protests had taken a new form, a peaceful march through Lincoln Square, led by Maya Thompson and community leaders. Thousands joined, their voices united in a call for justice. James attended, not as an FBI agent, but as a citizen, walking alongside families and students. The march ended in the square where it all began, with candles lit in a vigil for those affected by profiling. The image of the glowing candles, shared across social media, became a beacon of hope, inspiring millions to join the call for a future where no one is judged by their skin. Each share carried the story further, turning a single moment in Lincoln Square into a national cry for change. As the vigil ended, James's phone buzzed with a message from Lisa. "This is bigger than we thought. National News wants an interview. You ready?" James typed back, "Not about me. It's about the movement. Let's keep pushing." Months had passed since the incident in Lincoln Square, but its impact still reverberated through Chicago and beyond. The 19th District Precinct was undergoing a transformation, with new training programs, a civilian oversight board, and regular community forums to rebuild trust. Captain Sarah Mitchell had become a vocal advocate for reform, speaking at national conferences and working closely with James Carter and Maya Thompson to ensure the changes were more than cosmetic. James stood in Lincoln Square on a crisp spring morning, the same bench where it all began, now adorned with a small plaque, "A place for all." The square was bustling again, but there was a new energy, a sense of unity, of possibility. James held his sketchbook, but today he wasn't drawing. Instead, he was meeting with a group of high school students who'd organized an art project inspired by his story, using sketches to tell stories of justice and resilience. Maya approached, a warm smile on her face. "You've started something big, James," she said, gesturing to the students. "This square, this city, it's different now." James nodded, his expression thoughtful. "It's a start, but there's still so much to do. Not just here, but everywhere." A memory surfaced, a conversation with his late father, a civil rights activist who'd taught him that change was a marathon, not a sprint. "Every step forward counts," his father had said, "but you've got to keep running." James carried those words with him, a guiding light in his work with the FBI, and now in this movement. Across town, Daniel Walsh sat in a community center, attending a workshop on implicit bias. His termination had been finalized, a public reckoning that left him jobless and adrift. But in the weeks since, he'd begun to confront the truth about himself. The workshop was his first step, a tentative attempt to understand the biases that had shaped his actions. He listened as a facilitator shared stories of profiling, including James's, and for the first time, Walsh felt not just guilt, but a desire to change. After the session, Walsh approached the facilitator, a former officer turned reformer. "I don't know if I can fix what I did," he said, his voice low, "but I want to try." The facilitator nodded, offering a small smile. "That's where it starts, Daniel. Keep showing up." Back at the precinct, Mitchell sat in her office, reviewing a report on the new oversight board's first meeting. The changes were working. Complaints about profiling had dropped, and community trust was slowly rebuilding. But she knew it wasn't enough. She picked up the phone and called James, who was now a regular consultant for the precinct. "Agent Carter," she said when he answered, "we're hosting a national summit on police reform. I want you to speak. Your story, your vision. It's what people need to hear." James paused, looking out at the students in Lincoln Square, their sketches vibrant with hope. "I'm in, Captain," he said. "Let's make it count." The call ended, and James returned to the students, sharing stories and sketching alongside them. The sun was setting, casting a golden glow over the square, and for a moment, James felt his father's presence, a quiet affirmation that he was on the right path. As the students packed up, one of them, a young girl named Aisha, handed James a sketch of a candlelit vigil. "This is for you," she said shyly, "for what you're doing." James took the sketch, his heart swelling. "Thank you, Aisha," he said, his voice soft. "This means more than you know." He walked away from the square, the sketch in his hand, a symbol of the change he'd helped spark. The road ahead was long, but James was ready. This wasn't just his story. It was the story of a city, a nation, and a movement that refused to be silenced. With every step, he carried the weight of a glance, but also the light of hope, knowing that together they could build a future where no one was judged by the color of their skin. The camera panned out, the vibrant colors of Lincoln Square fading into a montage of protests, vigils, and community forums, a voiceover echoing James's words. "Change starts with us. It starts with a glance and ends with justice." The screen faded to black, a powerful message appearing. "Stand with us. Together, we can build a world where justice is not a dream, but a reality for all."